This is our final substantive session of the conference. This is plenary session 6, Securing and Enabling Predictable, Inclusive Recovery Financing. It's going to explore one of the most critical enablers for recovery readiness. The session will examine how governments and partners can strengthen financial readiness to ensure timely, transparent, and risk-informed recovery. Our distinguished panelists will share national experiences and subnational experiences with innovative financing strategies that combine public and private resources, prearranged funds, contingent credit, insurance, and community-level instruments. Very happy to introduce our moderator for this session and welcome up the panelists to the stage. The session will be moderated by Ms. Elizabeth Riley, the Executive Director for the Caribbean Disaster Management Agency, also known as CDMA. I'd like to welcome to the stage His Excellency the Honorable Daniel Garwe, the Minister of Local Government and Public Works for the Government of Zimbabwe. Ms. Maria Angela Leal Pineda, the Undersecretary for Risk Reduction Management and National Coordinator for Disaster Reduction in Guatemala. Mr. Bishraj Neopane, Undersecretary for the Ministry of Home Affairs in Nepal. Ms. Angela Oliveira, the Deputy State Secretary for Reconstruction for the State Government of Rio Grande do Sul, Brazil. And Mr. Carlos Lee Morrissey, the Program Advisor and Team Leader for Climate Change and Resilience for the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat, also known as PIFS. Welcome to the stage, please. And Ms. Riley, when you are ready, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Paul, and good afternoon to everyone. We're getting a little thin here, but it is the last session. I'm sure the others will come back. So, distinguished colleagues, when disasters strike, the immediate response is about saving lives, but recovery is about rebuilding futures. And at the core of recovery, of course, is the issue of finance. So welcome to this final plenary number 6, which is titled Securing and Enabling Predictable Inclusive Recovery Financing. As you heard, my name is Liz Riley, and I have the pleasure of being your moderator for this afternoon. So what are we really exploring in this evening's session? Well, in essence, there are 5 things we're going to look at. We're going to talk a bit about how governments and partners can enhance their financial readiness to ensure a timely, transparent, and risk-informed recovery. Second, we want to have the opportunity to share national experiences with financing strategies that combine public and private resources, including prearranged funds, contingent credit, insurance, and other community-level instruments. Third, the panelists will have an opportunity to highlight enabling policies and institutional arrangements that have improved the speed, equity, and accountability of recovery finance. Fourth, we will explore how financial systems can be aligned with disaster risk reduction, climate, and social protection goals to ensure recovery investments future risk. And finally, we also have the opportunity to talk a bit about how countries and their partners can advance the priority actions by making recovery financing more predictable, inclusive, and integrated into national planning. So with that introduction, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our distinguished panel. And first, to my immediate right, I want you to welcome the Honorable Daniel Garwe, who is the Minister of Local Government and Public Works in Zimbabwe. Please welcome Minister Garwe. To Minister's immediate right is Ms. Angela Oliveira, who is the Deputy State Secretary for Reconstruction in the Rio Grande do Sul, State Government of Rio Grande do Sul, Brazil. Welcome. And on my left, immediately, is Mr. Carlos Lee Morrissey, who is the Program Advisor and Team Leader for Climate Change and Resilience with the Pacific Islands Forum. Welcome. To Carlos's left is Ms. Maria Angela Leal Pineda, who is the Undersecretary for Risk Reduction Management, National Coordinator for Disaster Reduction in Guatemala. And to the far left is Mr. Bisharaj Nupane, Undersecretary, Ministry of Home Affairs from Nepal. Welcome. So colleagues, we have a very diverse panel with us today, spanning across the globe. And before we actually dive into the conversations, I want to invite you to participate a little bit in the topic. So we have a Slido question for you. So just pull out your cell phones and get those QR codes up. And our first Slido question, which is on screen, what is the biggest barrier to predictable recovery financing in your context? So you have an opportunity for a couple of minutes to give your indications, and we're just going to track on screen. So already seeing some responses, speaking about limited prearranged instruments. Let's keep it coming. Lack of political will. Let's get some more answers on the board, those who haven't pulled out their phones as yet. Okay, seeing some patterns emerging. So right now, an equal balance, lack of political will seems to be taking over. Okay, so Minister Garwe, we have you under a little bit of pressure here. Okay, so 50% of the responses are speaking of lack of political will. Okay, so it seems as if that is one of the dominant issues related to being a barrier to predictable recovery financing in your context. So I'm sure we'll get to talk a little bit more about that and to see if maybe we can bring a more balanced perspective to maybe what should be some of the other barriers that are facing the predictable recovery financing. Because I know certainly in my region, there are many other things that are impacting that conversation. So let's go to the second Slido question. And this question is, what type of instrument do you think has the most significant untapped potential for predictable recovery financing? And you have a suite of options there. Some you may be familiar with, some maybe not as familiar, but we'll certainly have an opportunity to learn a little bit more about the ones that you may not know a lot about by the time we finish the interventions by the panel. So thank you. I'm already seeing responses coming through. Okay, very balanced type of a responses coming through here. Resilient bonds. Sovereign insurance and risk pools as a potential option. So you're seeing the possibility of this. Okay, and in the Caribbean, we do have the Caribbean Risk Insurance Facility, which is one of the first multi-country pools. So it's interesting that that's emerged on top. All right, okay, thank you so much for your participation. I hope that woke you up just a little bit. So let's just dive right in then to the questions. And I will first of all invite the Honorable Daniel Garwe to share some perspectives. And Minister Garwe, the question to you is, how is Zimbabwe aligning disaster recovery financing with broader development and climate adaptation plans?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Coordinator. Zimbabwe, in line with our national vision, which is Vision 2030, of becoming an upper middle income economy by that year, has aligned disaster recovery financing with development and climate change adaptation. And this is done through integration of disaster risk management and climate action in the national development strategy. This is through national budgeting, prioritizing resilience building in vulnerable sectors such as agriculture, infrastructure, and strengthening national and local capacities to implement climate-smart recovery and development plans. Our government has managed to foster a shift from reactive disaster response to proactive integrated disaster risk reduction and adaptation strategies. In terms of ensuring that every place and everyone is attended to, we now have a devolution policy or a decentralization policy as one of the most important initiatives in which government has employed over the years to ensure that presidential declaration of leaving no one and no place behind in development and decision-making is fully implemented. The national budget commits 5% of its budget towards devolution and is disbursed to local authorities for utilization in projects that build communities. Devolution agenda places people on the center of development agenda for their communities. And this has seen a lot of devolution projects taking place throughout the country in terms of building of schools, clinics, hospitals, infrastructure, roads, bridges, etc. Partnerships. We have also fostered private-public sector partnerships, ensuring that there is fiscal sustainability, and this is through integration of disaster risk reduction into broader development work. Local authorities. As a quasi-government, we have been directed to channel 1% of their annual budget towards disaster preparedness and climate change adaptation, and to prioritize planning of safer cities through production of master plans and local plans which are responsive to the demands of climate change. Zimbabwe experienced a major cyclone disasters in 2019, Cyclone Idai, which caused a lot of losses, including lives, livelihoods, and infrastructure. In its response, government made a conscious decision to hinge response on building back better and resilience building principles. After Cyclone Idai, government and its partners working with communities embarked on the recovery projects, which included construction of roads, telecommunication systems, energy, social amenities, infrastructure, which was destroyed by the cyclone. Further to that, government also embarked on wash and agriculture restoration projects to ensure the communities' livelihoods are restored and enhanced. All the recovery projects were climate-proofed to ensure sustainability. During the response to the 2023-24 El Nino-induced drought, our President, Dr. Mnangagwa, directed that government respond to the drought disaster in 3 parts, which are: 1, search and rescue. We looked at understanding how many people were affected by the drought and how many sectors were also affected. The search and rescue then informed immediate actions required. Number 2, mitigation. Government instituted the relief measures to affected people, communities, and sectors using the mantra of leaving no one and no place behind. The labor and old households were involved in the development and resuscitation of community assets. Number 3, resilience building. Government looked at the drought as a window of opportunities to improve its food security systems, water and agriculture as well. Several initiatives that included drought mitigation centers, accelerated presidential borehole drilling schemes, irrigation programs, and village business units, amongst others, transformed not only the livelihoods of our communities, but contributed immensely to the country's strategic grain reserve in the economy. Let me turn to prioritizing climate-resilient infrastructure. Recovery efforts must aim at creating stronger, more resilient public infrastructure, housing, livelihoods, and services in disaster-impacted communities. Zimbabwe is focusing on building long-term coping capacity in climate-sensitive sectors, particularly agriculture, which is crucial for its economy and livelihoods. This has been done through climate-smart agriculture initiatives, which include Pfumvudza in Twasa, accelerated irrigation programs, village business units, and drought mitigation centers. Strengthening early warning systems. Based on the United Nations and Maputo Declaration on Early Warning for All initiatives, Government of Zimbabwe is currently strengthening robust early warning systems to enable the early action by all. Early warning information must reach every community, every sector, and every individual on time to make informed decisions. The transition in forecasting from what the weather will be to what the weather will do has enabled our communities to react responsibly ahead of a potential hazard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Garwe. And I really appreciated your government's focus on being people-centered. This is what came through to me, and certainly the commitment to localization with the percentage allocation for the devolution of projects to the local level. I think this is an important intervention. So I'll ask you a follow-up question here. And what institutional innovations could ensure predictability and inclusiveness of recovery financing in African contexts?
Thank you very much for the follow-up question. Let me start by integrating disaster risk reduction. There is an effort to integrate DRR financing into broader development work rather than treating it as a standalone area. This approach supports the implementation of projects that drive sustainable development and climate resilience. Africa Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, strongly earmarks a sustainable African community which is resilient and lives in inheritance for future generations. Let me turn on to financial instruments. The use of disaster risk finance and insurance mechanisms are explored to provide pre-arranged financial support for emergency response and recovery efforts when climate-related shocks occur. During the 2023-2024 El Nino-induced drought disaster, the government of Zimbabwe, together with some of its partners, had insured the season with Africa risk capacity. And when the drought struck, there was at least $31 million payout, which went a long way in responding to the drought, as well as investing in more resilient infrastructure. I urge African governments to explore more options for disaster financing and disaster risk transfer through insurance, though insurance is one of them. Multi-hazard contingency planning. Preparedness is crucial in lessening the toll of disasters on communities. Government and partners should always endeavor to plan for disasters as they are unavoidable. Proper planning reduces the cost of responding to disasters, hence should be prioritized. In Zimbabwe, yearly a national multi-hazard contingency plan is produced following a seasonal rainfall forecast by our Met Department. As member state, it is critical to plan for these disasters and jointly plan for transboundary disasters. Let me turn on to regional collaboration. The SADC countries made a decision to create SADC Humanitarian Emergency Operation Center, SHOC, which is responsible for the coordination of regional disaster risk preparedness, response and early recovery to support member states affected by disasters. The center facilitates the supply chain management of equipment and supplies that SADC responders require during deployment of humanitarian support to member states. In terms of anticipatory actions, the government of Zimbabwe has embraced anticipatory action as part of its disaster preparedness and response strategy through coming up with a national anticipatory action framework. Anticipatory action is imperative as it provides basis to take humanitarian measures before a predicted hazard, such as a natural disaster, strikes to prevent or reduce its impacts on lives, livelihoods, and communities. African governments must set aside multi-hazard anticipatory action resources across all sectors. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Garwe. And I think this is a very useful example of the diversity of the financial mechanisms which can be used by governments. And I think it's certainly demonstrated a counter perspective to the identification of political will being a challenge, certainly not in the case of Zimbabwe. We can see this very clearly demonstrated. So thank you, Minister. And let's go across the waters now, across the Atlantic and across the Caribbean Sea as well, to Guatemala. And I want to invite Maria Angela to share with us how is Guatemala strengthening recovery financing through national risk reduction strategies?
Well, thank you. Guatemala has a national policy on disaster risk reduction. So we prepare a comprehensive plan for 10 years, which was based as a result of a management methodology that links the programming and budget for disaster risk reduction of 13 public institutions which represents 2% of Guatemala's national budget. This is a clear example that with the will, leadership, and commitment of different sectors like health, communication, economy, labor, environment, defense, security, among others, it's possible to strengthen disaster risk reduction. According to the Ministry of Finance, based on the 2024 Global Risk Report, Guatemala has identified 5 risks: state fragility, labor shortages, erosion of social cohesion, extreme weather events, and illicit economic activity. Despite this, the environmental risks are classified as having a medium fiscal impact and are considered likely to materialize as these risks are recurrent and the fiscal impact depends on the type and magnitude of the events. Given that average, potential impact is between 0.5 and 1% of the GDP based on an analysis of recent events. The recurrence of hydrometeorological events is becoming more intense and frequent, which means that the state is spending more of its budget on assisting the affected population. In order to guarantee the protection of individuals and families and protect the integrity and safety of the population in general, result in a fiscal deficit in the budget. Therefore, the institutions that are part of CONRED system, which are governmental, non-governmental, private sector, and territorial authorities and organizations, adopt measures to invest in disaster risk reduction, early recovery, and building back better. They are convinced that investing in prevention before disaster appears is more profitable than emergency response. This guarantees both public and private investments.
Thank you so much for that response, Maria Angela. And I really loved what you said about the comprehensive plan and the demonstrated actions by the various sectors. I think this was very important coming through in your presentation, but also the emphasis on the evidence basis for the decision-making at the sectoral level, which I think is a big gap that we see, certainly in the region that I come from. So thanks for that intervention. So let's go over to Nepal. And let's talk a little bit about Nepal, which has experienced many significant disasters. And Nepal has faced repeated large-scale disasters. And what lessons can you share, Mr. Nuprane, on embedding recovery finance into national planning and budgetary systems?
Namaste, good afternoon. Thank you, Ms. Elizabeth, honorable ministers, panelists, and distinguished delegates. I am honored to be present at the high-level policy dialogue on resilient recovery and express gratitude on behalf of the government of Nepal to the UNDRR and the host country, Japan, for convening governments and stakeholders for this important policy dialogue event. When we talk about loss and damage in Nepal from various disaster events, Nepal faces significant fiscal risks due to recurrent natural disasters, which are increasingly exacerbated by climate change. A recent fiscal risks assessment conducted by Government of Nepal in collaboration with the Ministry of Finance and National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Authority has identified a substantial resource gap in disaster risk reduction and recovery. Catastrophic risk modeling estimate average annual direct loss over US $325 million from earthquake and over 220 million from hydrometeorological events. With the majority of the damages concentrated in residential, private housing and public infrastructure. To put things into perspective, resource estimation for the recovery and reconstruction due to the Western Nepal earthquake and monsoon-related disaster of 2024 is around 794 million US dollar. Major portion of resources needed for private housing and rest for others. Now talking about recovery and reconstruction, the Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act 2017 enables the creation of contingency funds at all government tiers in Nepal. We have 3 tiers of government: federal government, provincial government, and local government. Nepal has disaster responsive social protection and relief distribution standard in implementation to guide the single window relief and recovery efforts of the government. A separate operating procedures is in action to guide the reconstruction of the private housing affected due to the disaster. Federal, provincial, and local governments contribute to the reconstruction and recovery financing of the private housing. From federal government, 50%, provincial 30%, and 20% from local government. And for the public infrastructure, construction and recovery, loss and damage assessment of the damaged and affected public infrastructure as well as the reconstruction effort are conducted by the respective sectoral ministries. However, effective policy implementation demands increased annual replenishment and enhanced institutional capacity, especially across sub-national governments. Nepal is experiencing the need of the establishment of dedicated disaster and climate resilience fund managed under the existing National Disaster Management Fund framework. Providing such funds would strengthen Nepal's ability to respond climate-induced disasters. It would also facilitate access to global financing mechanisms like Green Climate Fund, Adaptation Fund, and Loss and Damage Fund financing facilities. Success will require leveraging bilateral and multilateral technical assistance for fund structuring and management. Nepal actively seeks to explore risk transfer instruments to mitigate sovereign level fiscal exposure, including catastrophe bonds, catastrophe insurance from multilateral and private markets. Parametric insurance products that offer rapid, predefined payouts based on measurable disaster thresholds, piloted in agriculture and livestock with potential for broader application, encouraging innovation in insurance products tailored to Nepal's risk profile, and promoting public-private partnership for disaster risk financing. I would like to conclude my expressing our strong commitment and support towards the implementation of Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction and state that Nepal is determined to be a disaster resilient nation. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for that intervention, B. Siraj. And so in listening to the contribution that you made, what has struck me is that you really see the financing of recovery as a shared responsibility. That's coming through very clearly, where you involve the private sector and the public sector, but also on the public side, you look at the multiple levels. And that's certainly a very interesting model. And you also spoke about a diverse range of products that are utilized in Nepal. So thanks so much for that intervention, and I'm going to hopefully circle back to you once we have enough time for your follow-up question. So let's talk a little bit about what now is happening in Brazil. So I want to bring Angela into the conversation. So, Angela, we all know about the catastrophic floods, which took place in Rio Grande do Sul in 2024. So, following those floods, what innovations or partnerships helped mobilize resources quickly for recovery?
Thank you, Elizabeth. I would like to thank this invitation to share our experience, as it's very important for us as a subnational government to be here and to listen and to learn with the others. And following the catastrophic floods, we relied on strong institutional cooperation to mobilize resources quickly. And this included a close partnership among the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary branches. And I would like to greet our colleagues that are here, Rafael and Mr. Paulo Falcão from the federal government, who are here with us today. Our presence together in this event illustrates that shoulder-to-shoulder cooperation and partnership between our levels of government. And in the technical way, it is very important. This collaborative environment made possible the rapid approval of a federal law that allocated to the recovery $2.6 billion US. And this amount was firstly allocated for state debt payments to the federal government. And now these initiative mechanisms are available for all the states and operates much like that for climate swap, transforming the debt obligations into direct investments in recovery and disaster risk reduction. And with this unprecedented measure, that we think is an innovative in the legal way, we established the Rio Grande Fund, that is our reconstruction fund that we mentioned before. And it is our primary financial instrument to support public policies and projects focused on recovery and long-term resilience. At the same time, the federal government created FIRESI, that is another fund that is dedicated and managed by a public bank with initial allocation of $1.2 billion. And it aimed to build new flood protection system on metropolitan area of our capital. It is the first time in the history of Brazil that we have insured public funds on this order to design big projects that was not in our pipeline before. And additionally, to support the productive sector, banking institutions stepped in with innovative measures such as postponing loans payments and providing new lines of credit to help mitigate losses, especially to local business. Finally, I would like to recognize the critical role of blended finance in the disaster response. Alongside public funds, civil society organizations, and philanthropic contributions, and also, I need to mention international donations that played mixed like a vital role in the mediated response, complementing government actions and ensuring a more inclusive and effective recovery process.
Thanks so much for that contribution. And, you know, one of the things I'm picking up there is that it's also about innovation in terms of looking at different ways of financing the recovery, and certainly the volumes of the financing that you're talking about were very substantial. And I also noted the point you raised about the importance of the legislation, which is that enabling framework which actually facilitated the type of cooperation at the national level to respond to the flood. So thanks for bringing that to the table. Okay, so we are going to take our focus now over to the Pacific Islands and to Carlos. So Carlos, can you share with us how are Pacific Island states pooling resources and leveraging regional risk pools for recovery financing?
Thank you, moderator. First of all, I bring you warm Pacific greetings, quite far away from home, but in saying that, I want to acknowledge you and DRR, IRP, and of course the government of Japan for enabling us to be here, to have a voice. First of all, I don't represent a country, but I represent a regional organization. So I think in the context of the question, it's quite apt in the sense that we're pulling resources together, we're coming together as a region and approaching this more at the regional level rather than the national level. But in saying that, we still acknowledge the efforts from the national governments. But in saying that, given in the context of the Pacific, very small populations, dispersed countries, islands, within the countries themselves, they're very dispersed, covering a lot of ocean. So we coined the phrase, we are a blue continent in that sense. But also in saying that, we also have a variety of high exposures. We suffer from cyclones, storm surges, earthquakes, volcanoes, and of course the added impediment of climate change risk and climate change impacts. So given that, and they're coming together as risk pool, it's really quite critical that when we pool resources and get into, in this case, parametric insurance, that we tailor the products that are fit for purpose. And I say that also given our experience. So I'm quoted in the region we went to one of our member countries, and I actually thanked the minister for withdrawing from our parametric insurance company. And I say that in the sense that they withdrew and then they came back later, because that forced us to reevaluate our product offerings so that it's fit for purpose. So we had a country that suffered a lot of rainfall from a Cat 3 cyclone, but the insurance policy was for Cat 3 and wind speed. Did not account for the suffering or the damages caused by flooding or heavy rainfall. So obviously they suffered from, well, they're not very happy with not getting a payout. So in saying that, we have to adjust the products. But also, it's in terms of given the context that I was referred to, risk pooling and coming together actually makes economic sense and produces economies of scale, allows us to be able to negotiate better deals at both the international reinsurance and capital markets. So given that, the Pacific Catastrophe Risk Insurance, funnily enough, modeled a lot on the Caribbean example. One of the key things about that Pacific Catastrophe Risk Insurance company is the ownership. So it's owned by all the members of the Pacific Islands Forum. So in that sense, they're almost mandated to take policies. But again, I mentioned the importance of fit for purpose. So given that the ownership is actually with the members, parametric insurance has actually allowed for rapid liquidity. I heard the minister refer to it in terms of the risk transfer. But also it's important to understand that it's only one product in the suite of products that are available, and noting that pre-arranged financing, the World Bank offers KTDO, ADB with the CDF, Contingency Disaster Fund, all play a role, but governments have to be able to actually, how do you actually coordinate this? How do you bring this into national systems? And then given the regional organization that I represent, we have developed a disaster risk financing roadmap for the region, which informs our developing specific country DRF strategies. So as I speak, we just launched one for Solomon Islands, about to launch one for Vanuatu, my colleague sitting there in the audience, about to also waiting cabinet approval from Fiji. So we're developing in that we have the regional space, but also trying to pool resources to be able to help member countries. So given that context, but we also, in what I mentioned about layering and other products that go hand in hand, with the experience from the Pickwick company, we are now in the process, in fact, next week with the UNGA, we are launching a pledging event for the Pacific Resilience Facility to complement the risk pooling facility or the risk pooling products. If we have time, I want to come back into the intersection between climate finance and DRF and in the context of resilience building. And I think it's important if we have time to come back into that. So I think it's quite important given the discussions we're having now. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Carlos. And, you know, your initial example really drew a lot of parallels that we saw in the Caribbean region when the risk pooling finance facility was put in place, in terms of getting a very good understanding of the hazard coverage, but also attachment points, which is a very important piece to really navigate the correct mix, I would say, for individual states. So I'm going to come back to you, Carlos, in watching the clock. We do have some time, so I do want to ask a follow-up question. You can touch a bit on the area that you spoke to, but also I would like you to speak to additional reforms that may be required to make sovereign risk pools more accessible and affordable for SIDS.
Yeah, thanks for the follow-up question. So if you talk about parametric insurance, most of them are actually sovereign products. So what we have developed in conjunction with UNCDF is actually to offer micro parametric insurance that we're offering. We've trialed this in Fiji and Vanuatu to a certain extent. and we're actually trying to reach the communities and the households. So we're offering this through, and I think it's a good model. So in Fiji, we offer it through cooperatives. So we have, if you're familiar with the Fiji economy, the sugarcane farming is quite a huge industry. So the sugarcane farmers cooperative took out the insurance, parametric insurance, on behalf of their members. And the cooperative also pays the premiums. But then they deduct over the years, or the term of the financial year, they deduct from the payouts that they make to the farmers. The same, we've also introduced it to fisher folks, small fisheries or fishing cooperatives. Again, they pay the premiums on behalf of the members, but the members get the direct benefit. The other thing is also about, I spoke about layering financial products, but also within the insurance, parametric insurance, there's also a layered payout in terms of the parametric triggers. For example, if a cyclone Cat 3 is, if you get a Cat 3, but cyclones don't start off as Cat 3 straight away. They start off at Cat 1, they move to Cat 2 before they get to Cat 3, and then they might progress, hopefully not. But as they progress through the different stages, there are certain payouts. You might get a 30% payout if you hit Cat 2. If the wind speeds increase in certain amount of level, you might move up to 50% payout. When you get the full triggers met, then you get the 100% payout. So in that example, you get some sort of assistance before. So in a sense, it's actually starting to get the intersection with AA, anticipatory reaction. So you're getting the payouts before you get the full impact of the impending disaster, but you're getting the payout. So you also demonstrate. Insurance is a funny thing, because then the proof of the product is when the event happens, but you don't want the event to happen. But in the lead up to that, you have to provide some sort of assurance to the folks or to the communities that they're getting some benefits from engaging in these kind of products. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And I just love how you have moved to bring the products down from the national space into what I call the real space, where it impacts the people, right? So let's stick with this theme of looking at different types of instruments. So I want to circle back to a couple of our panelists. We've talked a bit about the risk pooling instruments. So let's go back to Nepal first, and then I will come to Guatemala. Bisharaj, how can countries like Nepal integrate prearranged financing instruments into their national systems?
Thank you very much. I already mentioned the instrument which we are planning to launch, and now we are in practice, especially agro-based or the livestock-based insurance is in practice. One of our province is now piloting private housing insurance also. This kind of instrument we are in implementation or in implementation process. For risk sharing, risk transfer, insurance is the major resource for any disaster incident. We are working on it.
Thank you so much for sharing that and looking at the areas that potentially you're exploring. So let's talk a little bit on the Guatemalan side. And so Maria and Hela, on the instrument side, what instruments have been most effective in Guatemala for mobilizing resources quickly post-disaster?
Well, I think that this is something that is common in the different parts of the world, the parametric insurance, the CAT-DDO, and now the Ministry of Finance is working to have the third CAT-DDO agreement with the World Bank, so we can work with that. The first and second loans were used in 2010 and 2020, and now we're looking for another one. And here the challenge is how to make this going directly to benefit the people and not only to try to not to affect the national budget. So that's the challenge, and how to deal with that. And I think that as long as the decision makers really understand what's going on in the territory, it's going to be easier to work with that. Because if not, they are making the decisions in a desk and they're not really getting the whole picture on how it's the people affected by all these events.
Thank you so much. And I just love how all of the contributions are really circling back to the real reason why we even discuss recovery, right? It's really about the people, how people are affected, and how do we assist and relieve the challenges that people face post-disaster. So let's travel back over to Brazil. And I want to pose a question to Angela. How did the Rio Grande do Sul align emergency financing with longer-term resilience investments?
Yes, actually, it was a challenge because not just in Rio Grande do Sul, but in Brazil in a general way, the investments in DRR was concentrated in response after the events. And our experience in Rio Grande do Sul is like a turning point for this. When we realized that the worst climate event so far was happening, we started immediately this unique strategy to deliver the projects across the time as a state-level plan, not a government program. And even if that means to make investments that never have happened before. And from the beginning, we have been focused in humanitarian response and support, but we are also buying early warning systems and planning long-term projects to protect our cities. And it was only possible because of this integrated approach that is the core of Plano Rio Grande. That is our strategy that is conceived in 5 axes that are emergency, diagnosis, recovery, resilience, and readiness, and is integrated by the core of governance. It makes it possible to advance in different areas with consistency and measure our progress, not only in our recovery, but also in our capacity to face new events. The governance that also includes the society and academical contribution and transparency is our guide in the process of allocation of the financial resource. As a public servant, and I have been a public manager for several years now, I can say it with no doubt that for the public manager, it's crucial to have this kind of framework, because the decisions that we need to make every day, it gives a security that the choices are aligned not only in an effective way in the present, but also in the long term. Finally, I think it is important to highlight the different finance solutions fits in the timeline after the disaster. We need to tailor it how your strategy will be, the different solutions will be allocated. Of course, that public injection that I mentioned before is important in the first moment, but considering that these kind of resources are always limited and that many recovery projects are long-term by nature, we are talking about construction works that may extend over several years. So our finance strategy seeks to diversify the sources. We are also cooperating with private sector in private-public partnerships, but also financing institutions to provide options to the future. Now we are working together with multilateral banks such as NDB and IDB and AEB in designing credit operations that will be available to the municipalities in the future, probably on the next year. Is the second step in the continuation of our financing strategy. And these operations already include selection criteria that require resilience-focused projects, ensuring not only build back better what was lost, but also the new structures from the scratch, aligned with that principle of building back better before.
Thank you really for sharing that. And So fully understanding the importance of really trying to diversify the sources of the recovery financing. We certainly in the Caribbean have had those types of experiences as well. And, you know, in instances, recovery in some of the Caribbean islands has taken sometimes up to 7 years and sometimes longer to try to get back to the point that we were before. So, colleagues, you have heard from across the globe, many different contexts, from small states to some larger states, continental states. And we're going to give the audience an opportunity to pose questions to our panelists who have made, I think, really excellent contributions and shared quite a bit in terms of their own experiences with recovery financing. Yes, we have a question. Please identify yourself at the mic, and please indicate also to whom you would wish to direct the question.
I have one question for two of the panelists. And I'm Safi Rizvi. I'm advisor in the National Disaster Management Authority of India. So we in India also trying to get these things going at a national scale. So my question to the Pacific Islands and to Nepal is that who is funding the premium for the parametric programs and for the risk pools?
Okay, takers? Who's going to take it first?
Yeah, good question. One of the things I missed out in the question about some of the reforms that are needed, one of which is actually affordability and accessibility. So the affordability part, we are currently, and there is a study, World Bank did a study on the affordability of premiums, risk premiums on catastrophe insurance. And for small island states, it's actually not affordable in the long term. So currently there's a heavy reliance on subsidized premiums. Going forward, and it's part of the reforms we're also doing, we actually try to reward countries by having this premium discounts if you can track back to the investments. One of the things about actually accessing DRF financing is actually effectiveness of implementation. When you get the funding, what are you actually going to spend it on? So one of the things we're actually putting as an incentive is that we're actually tracking. We've done 2 consultancies workshops at the moment. We have 2 more to go, around trying to influence disbursements of funds when they hit country national levels, respecting national sovereignty and national processes. But it's actually a good segue for me to add in the importance of whole of systems approaches, so that DRF doesn't sit by itself, disaster recovery doesn't sit by itself. It should be a part of a whole of system, whole of government efforts to build resilience. Not so much about recovery. So if I can just rephrase the terminology that's in the Sendai framework about building back better, we actually try to build forward better. So that's in the investment in incentivizing, but your question is the long term is not affordable, but we're currently heavily reliant on donors to subsidize premiums. Thanks.
Thank you very much. In Nepal, in mega disaster situation, we call international community to support us. Bilateral and multilateral agencies are supporting us. But for small efforts, just I already mentioned about insurance that we are covering through our annual budget system, just like agro and livestock, that kind of instrument we are covering from our regular budget. For mega disaster situation, in 2015 we faced a mega earthquake, and 2023 also we face a disaster, earthquake disaster, and last year September also we faced a flash flood incident. So at that time we will call disaster emergency and request to international committee. World Bank is supporting on us on that situation.
Thank you very much. Other questions? Yes, please, our colleagues from UAE.
Thank you, Chairperson. The UAE, during the COVID, has established something called emergency fund. So usually this is was taken care of during the pandemic, especially in air ticketing and airports and for people coming in. So I wanted to know if Brazil, for example, has anything to do with tax that is designated for emergency fund, because in the UAE we do have a fund, but it is coming from the government, just in case we use it for recovery, response and recovery. So anything on that regard in Brazil?
Actually, we studied about to convert taxes to our reconstruction fund, and we are still a work in progress for us, because our reconstruction fund, as same as yours, is 98% of the amount is from public budget. It's not. It's something like I said. Is something that was a debt the state level have with the federal government, and it's not more for 3 years. We do not have to pay this debt. All the amount is going to the reconstruction fund. But we have this project that is something we are thinking about to go to the legislative for the next year about something that is some reconstruction incentive to the private sector to recompose the taxes into reconstruction fund. We already have it for another kind of investments, but it's something that is still a work in progress for us.
Thank you very much. So I don't see any other questions on the floor. So, okay, very quickly. I know you had the floor before, but we'll allow it.
Okay, sorry, but again to Pacific Islands, since you have done so much work on risk pools and parametrics, like the Caribbean islands and Peru and Colombia, which have gone in for cat bonds, New Zealand has recently gone in for its second tranche of cat bonds. So have the Pacific Island states considered cat bonds? If so, why? If not, why not?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So we're currently doing some work with UNDP. So in the context again, context is very important. In the context of the Pacific, only one country has actually issued both blue bonds and green bonds, and that's Fiji. For the rest of the Pacific Island countries, we are currently working with UNDP to issue a regional blue bond. Not a cat bond, but it's similar sort of. If at the end of the day, I'm sure all of us here understand that bonds are actually debt instruments, but the application and also who's going to invest in that. So before you issue those, there has to be some infrastructure, or what I call financial infrastructures elements need to be present. One, you have to have capital markets. Currently in the Pacific, there's only 2 stock exchanges. You have to have very good reserve bank or federal bank type regulations. The risk, investment risk has to be managed or has to be brought down for investors to invest or to be able to purchase the bond. So it's the question of matching the bond issuer versus the actual bond purchasers. The work on a regional bond is actually to pull some of the resources that are existing in terms of financial infrastructure to be able to back up the actual cat bonds. So work in the pipeline, but not quite there yet. Almost getting there. Thank you.
Thanks so much. So we do have a few minutes left, so I'm going to ask my panelists just to share any final thoughts. You've heard the presentations from the other panelists, and you've heard the types of questions coming from the floor. So what are the one key message that you want to leave as we close off the session? And I'm going to start to my far left with Bisharaj from Nepal.
Thank you very much. The disasters scenario is create a liability globally, I think. In mega disaster situation, one country cannot cope up the situation. So we have to work together, share responsibility, and get together, I think. Like Nepal, we have not a huge economy. Every year, disaster create a problem. Regular type of disaster, we can cope up. But in mega disaster situation, For recovery and resilience, we all have to work together and share the responsibility. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Very effective words. Maria and Angela?
One thing that it's just in my mind is that when we talk about early recovery and Build Back Better, we have to take into consideration that we have also to allow or put money for mitigation, because if not, then we cannot build back better. We have to consider everything so we can really make a more prospective risk reduction in our countries. And we have to take into account each and every aspect of what does early recovery and Build Back Better means, not only thinking about how we're going to finance that, but with that money, how we are going to work, so we are going to be sure that our people is safe.
Thank you very much. And Carlos?
Thank you. I feel like I've been talking too much, but let me just go back to what I said. If we have time, I'll come back to it. So risk-informed development is actually about what I call the risk premium on development. And the same thing applies to climate finance, applies to DRF, in the sense that you're trying to preload the risk premium in your development. And I acknowledged the minister from Uganda yesterday when she said that it's actually when you get into your national planning and your national budgeting allocation discussions, you are trying to factor in the risk factor in there. So in that sense, we have to change this narrative to actually understand people that there's actually a triple dividend payoff in early investment in resilience development. So you avoid losses, you have obviously the economic benefits, and you also have social environmental benefits that flow on from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. And Angela? Final words from Brazil?
For the final words, not just from this panel, but about all this event, I would like to highlight in our team the secure and enable predictable but inclusive recovery finance. And for me, it's important to highlight the importance of technical assistance to access these finance solutions, because in our case, we have 497 municipalities that is still with a lack of capacities and to technical development in these projects to access these finance solutions. So I think this assistance is not optional, is essential, alongside financial instruments that we are building to support the resilient recovery.
Thanks very much. And Minister Garwe, I'm going to give you the final word.
Thank you very much, Coordinator. I think it's important for all governments to realize that climate change is here to stay and it's a reality. And its consequences are also a reality. Because of those new realities, there is need to invest hugely in education in terms of awareness campaigns. I mean, where I come from, we've got two segments in the communities. We've got the rural communities and we've got the urban communities. The urban communities are not so much of a problem, but the rural communities, this is where a lot of investment in education, investment in infrastructure, sustainable infrastructure has to be, resources have to be channeled towards to ensure that school-going children, women, the youth, people living with disabilities are also part of the whole program. It needs a whole of society approach. Everybody must be roped in, everybody must be included in preparing, in planning, and in educating everyone about the impact of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garwe. And colleagues, just to give a very quick wrap up, we are at time. So just some of the key messages coming through, and I want to start with the point that Minister Garwe made about really the complexities that all of us are experiencing now with climate change, and the fact that the hazard landscape has completely changed. And it means because we're having more impacts, we're going to have to recover more. So it's a big opportunity for us to build resilience. That's the first key message. Second, coming from across the entire panel was the point about the focus on people and that we have to reach the people when we're looking at recovery financing instruments, methodologies, and how we're doing the implementation. 3, diversity and appropriateness of instruments. And we heard about some of the experiences where some flexibility changes had to be made, and that is okay because we have to learn. And I think as we explore new instruments, what is important that we document those lessons and we be ready to make the adjustments if necessary. I think that's critical. And then finally, just the point on the ex-ante recovery financing planning. We have to do it beforehand and also make sure that we are looking at the whole issue of localization and capacity building in the implementation. So I want to say a big thank you to the panel. Thank you for bringing your experiences to the meeting and for your open sharing and for answering the questions. And please give them a round of applause, and I'll hand back over to Paul.